The airport was alive with the usual morning chaos, rolling suitcases, half-awake travelers clutching coffee, and the constant murmur of boarding announcements. Steven Seagal blended into the noise like any ordinary passenger. No sunglasses, no entourage, no special treatment. Just a tall man in a black jacket, traveling alone on an early flight to Chicago. He preferred it that way, quiet, simple, unnoticed. At the gate, the agent scanned his ticket, nodded, and welcomed him aboard. Steven stepped into the first-class cabin, placed his small bag overhead, and settled into seat 2A. He pulled out his headphones and relaxed, ready for a peaceful flight. But peace wasn't on the menu today. A few minutes later, a sharply dressed white businessman boarded. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw Steven sitting in his seat. Arms stiff, jaw tight, the man tapped his boarding pass aggressively as if displaying evidence. "That's my seat," he said loudly. Steven removed one headphone. "Your seat?" he asked calmly. "Check again." The businessman waved down a flight attendant. She hurried over, glanced quickly at the businessman's pass, then looked at Steven with a doubtful frown, as if his simple clothes and quiet demeanor couldn't possibly belong in first class. "Sir," she said to Steven, "I think there's been a mix-up. Could you step out for a moment while we figure this out?" Steven handed her his ticket without argument. She took one look, hardly reading it, before motioning for him to stand. "Sir, please step outside the aircraft. This gentleman is a Platinum Elite member. We'll resolve this at the gate." Her tone wasn't rude, it was worse. Dismissive. Casual disrespect, like he was an inconvenience. Steven rose slowly. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just disappointed. Passengers in the front rows watched with quiet confusion. A woman whispered, "Isn't that Steven Seagal?" A man across the aisle lifted his phone, recording discreetly. The businessman smirked as Steven stepped into the jet bridge, escorted by the supervisor who didn't even bother to verify the digital ticket Steven showed him. Inside the plane, the whispers grew louder. Outside, Steven stood in silence, calm, still, but clearly done being pushed around. And seconds later, one phone call from Steven Seagal would flip the entire airline upside down. Steven Seagal stood quietly in the jet bridge, the soft hum of the aircraft behind him and the cold blast of airport air conditioning hitting his face. Passengers walking past stole glances at him, some confused, others curious. Most didn't believe what they were seeing. A few whispered, "Why'd they kick him out? That guy definitely didn't deserve that." But the airline staff acted like they didn't hear a thing. The supervisor, a stiff-shouldered man with clipped speech, tapped angrily at his tablet while barely acknowledging Steven. "Just wait over there," he said, pointing toward the wall like Steven was a schoolboy sent to detention. Steven folded his arms and leaned back, observing everything without a word. He wasn't embarrassed, he'd dealt with worse in his life. But the principle of it all, that bothered him. After a couple of minutes, a flight attendant stepped out of the aircraft to join the supervisor. She didn't even look Steven in the eye. "He doesn't look like a first-class passenger," she whispered, not quietly enough. Steven heard it clearly. The supervisor murmured back, "Yeah. Probably tried to sneak into an upgraded seat. We need to verify the system." Steven lowered his gaze, inhaling slowly. Calm. Controlled. But there was a hint of steel beneath the surface now. He stepped forward. "My ticket was purchased weeks ago," he said evenly. "You scanned it at the gate. I didn't sneak anywhere." The supervisor didn't bother looking up. "Sir, please wait until we finish. We have procedures." Procedures? That word stung not because of its meaning, but because of how they used it, as an excuse for their own bias. Another gate agent approached, glancing nervously between Steven and the supervisor. Should we double-check the booking?" The supervisor snapped, "I said I'll handle it." The young agent shrank back, intimidated. The businessman, the one now sitting comfortably in Steven's original seat, poked his head out the aircraft door with a smug grin. "Some people just can't accept when they're bumped," he said before disappearing back inside. A couple of passengers gasped at the arrogance. Someone muttered, "Man, this is messed up." Steven didn't react. His expression remained unreadable, almost serene. But his silence was the type that made people nervous. The supervisor finally looked up, exasperated. "Look, sir, you need to move away from the boarding area. You're blocking passengers." Steven lifted one eyebrow. "You told me to stand here." The supervisor flinched. He hadn't expected Steven to answer with such calm precision. "I'm giving you simple instructions," he said, raising his voice just slightly. "Do not escalate this. A small crowd of bystanders began slowing down near the jet bridge entrance, some recording with their phones. They didn't know the whole story, but they could feel the tension. They could see the disrespect. One woman approached Steven quietly. "Sir, I saw your ticket when the agent scanned it. You were definitely in first class," she whispered. "This is wrong." Steven nodded gently. "Thank you." Inside the aircraft, murmurs were rising too. Another passenger poked her head out. "That is Steven Seagal," she said loudly. "Why are you treating him like this?" The supervisor ignored her completely. Steven tried one more time, not demanding, not aggressive, just firm. "All I ask is that you check my original booking and boarding scan." The supervisor's annoyance boiled over. "Sir," he snapped, "if you keep questioning our process, I'll have to call airport security to escort you away from the gate." Gasps erupted from nearby passengers. Escort him? For what? He didn't do anything. Even the junior gate agent looked horrified. Steven's face changed just slightly. His jaw tightened. His posture straightened. The calmness remained, but it wasn't soft anymore. It was heavy. Powerful. He had been disrespected before. He had been underestimated before. But rarely this blatantly, and never this publicly without a shred of reason. A flight attendant tried adding fuel to the fire. "Sir, if you can't afford first class, you should have spoken to customer service instead of making a scene." A collective gasp swept the jet bridge. Steven didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten anyone. He didn't even move. He simply said, "I think you just made a very big mistake." And the atmosphere shifted instantly, the kind of shift you feel in your bones. Because everyone knew. Steven Seagal wasn't the type of man who spoke empty words. Have you ever seen someone abused by airline staff or authority for no reason? Comment your story below. The jet bridge had turned into an audience. 15, 20 people now lingered near the entrance, trying to understand how an airline could mishandle something so simple. Phones were recording. Voices were rising. But the airline staff acted like they were deaf to all of it. Steven stood in the middle of it all, unmoving, unreadable, and impossibly calm. But that calmness was starting to bend. The supervisor, still tapping angrily on his handheld device, muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable. Trying to scam his way into first class, dressed like that." Another gate agent chuckled softly. "Happens all the time." Steven's eyes opened slowly. "You think I tried to scam a seat?" he asked, voice quiet but ice cold. The supervisor looked up as if offended Steven had spoken at all. "Sir, step back. I'm not discussing this with you." A few nearby passengers exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered, "He's pushing him too far." But the supervisor didn't stop. He leaned toward his coworker and said, full volume, "Some people think they're special because they're tall and intimidating. Doesn't mean they belong up front." Steven closed his eyes for a moment. A long moment. He inhaled, steady, controlled, disciplined. He had spent decades mastering self-control. But no amount of training prepares a person for being publicly humiliated for no reason at all. A junior flight attendant stepped forward timidly. Sir," she said to the supervisor, voice shaky, "shouldn't we at least verify his reservation?" "The system." "Enough," he snapped. "I know what I'm doing." He didn't know. He didn't even realize what kind of man he was provoking. Inside the plane, the businessman, now comfortably seated in 2A, peeked out again. His tone was smug, taunting. "Maybe try economy next time," he said. "People like you fit better there." The crowd erupted with shocked murmurs. A teenage boy stepped forward. "Hey, that's not okay," he shouted. "You can't talk to him like that." The supervisor spun around and shouted back, "Mind your own business. All of you." It was too late. He had lost the room. Steven finally lifted his head, eyes sharp, posture straight. There was no anger in his face, just an intensity that made every person around him go silent. "Let me say this clearly," Steven said. "I paid for a first-class seat. I checked in. You scanned my ticket. And you removed me without verifying anything." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. People leaned in just to hear him. But the supervisor refused to back down. "You are obstructing boarding," he barked. "If you continue, I will call airport security. They can deal with you." The crowd gasped again. A woman stepped forward. "He hasn't done a single thing wrong. You're the ones escalating." A man added, "Check his boarding pass. What are you afraid of?" The supervisor waved them off and reached for his radio. "Dispatch, we may need an officer at gate 27. Passenger refusing to comply." Steven's eyebrow lifted slightly. Refusing to comply? He repeated softly. All I asked was that you check my ticket. But the supervisor wasn't listening, or didn't care. He turned to Steven and said the words that finally pushed everything past the limit. Sir, stop pretending you belong in first class. You're holding up real passengers. Silence fell so heavy the air felt thick. Even the businessman inside the plane went still. Steven took one step forward. Just one. The movement was slow, deliberate, measured. But in that one step was decades of discipline, control, and power. The supervisor actually stepped back instinctively. Steven didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't even touch anyone. He simply spoke, and his voice carried through the entire jet bridge. You've insulted me. You've profiled me. And you've refused to check the simplest piece of information in front of you. He paused. Now you're calling security because you don't want to admit you're wrong. The supervisor opened his mouth, but no words came out. Steven continued, I have done nothing to justify being removed from my seat. Nothing. And every single person here knows that. A ripple of agreement spread through the crowd. Yeah. That's right. This is discrimination. The supervisor froze, trapped between his pride and the reality unfolding around him. He looked around and finally realized he had lost control. And worst of all, the situation hadn't reached its peak yet. Because in part 4, someone in the crowd finally recognizes Steven Seagal, and the entire jet bridge explodes. The jet bridge had become a wall of tension. The supervisor stood frozen, the businessman looked restless, and Steven Seagal remained still, impossibly calm, but radiating a quiet authority that made everyone else nervous. Passengers continued recording. Others whispered in pockets, trying to understand what they were witnessing. But then, one voice cut through everything. A teenager, maybe 15 or 16, stepped forward, eyes wide, breath shaking. Wait, is that Steven Seagal? Every head turned. A few people blinked, unsure. Others looked at Steven more closely. And then the teen said again, louder this time. That's Steven Seagal. The Steven Seagal. Why are you treating him like this? The whisper spread like wildfire. That's him? No way. It is him. Why would they do that to Steven Seagal? Passengers inside the aircraft began leaning out of the cabin door. Some stood up from their first-class seats, craning their necks to look. One woman gasped. Oh my God, it is Steven Seagal. I've seen all his movies. Another man raised his phone higher and started live streaming. A small crowd inside the gate area gathered too, watching from behind the ropes. But the person most unsettled by this sudden shift was the supervisor. His face drained. He looked at Steven again, really looked, and for the first time, uncertainty crept into his expression. The junior gate agent whispered, Sir, he really is Steven Seagal. The supervisor snapped in a panic, I don't care who he is. He still needs to follow procedure. But his voice cracked. Everyone heard the crack. The teen didn't back down. He was following procedure. You kicked him out without checking anything. Passengers began chiming in, one after another. He was here before that other man. I saw his ticket. You're treating him differently because of how he looks. Are you serious right now? That's Steven Seagal. Suddenly the businessman inside the plane looked very uncomfortable. He sank back slightly in the seat that wasn't even his. The supervisor tried to regain control. Everyone, please return to your seats. This is a private matter between staff and the passenger. But no one moved. The crowd wasn't hostile, they were awake, alert, watching everything. Steven hadn't asked for their support. He hadn't said a word to them. But injustice has a way of uniting people. The teen stepped closer to Steven. Sir, do you want me to get someone? Like airport media or something? Steven shook his head gently. No, thank you. I'm handling it. His calmness only made the situation more unnerving, especially for the staff who had mistreated him. The flight attendant who earlier mocked him muttered, Oh my, he really is famous. Another passenger added, famous or not, the way they treated him was unacceptable. The murmurs rose into a steady wave of voices. People were angry now, not yelling but firm, solid, unified. And that unity pushed the supervisor further into panic. He cleared his throat, straightened his shoulders, and forced authority back into his voice. Sir, he said to Steven, I already assigned that seat. Even if you are who they say you are, we cannot inconvenience another paying customer. Steven stared at him for a long moment, then spoke softly. I am a paying customer. The supervisor swallowed, visibly rattled. Passengers inside the plane spoke up next. He paid for it. He was in the seat first. You're covering up your mistake. The businessman in 2A finally tried to defend himself weakly. Look, I just sat where they told me. But a woman cut him off. You watched them kick him out of his own seat. And you didn't say a word. With the crowd now fully aware of who Steven was and how unjustly he'd been treated, the pressure on the staff intensified. The supervisor tried signaling a nearby colleague to help, but she hesitated, glancing nervously at the cameras pointed at them. Steven looked around slowly, taking in the scene. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He didn't revel in the recognition. If anything, he looked tired. Tired of being treated like a problem instead of a person. He adjusted his jacket calmly, then locked eyes with the supervisor. And in that moment, even before Steven spoke, everyone could feel it. Something was about to shift. A line was about to be drawn. A message was about to be delivered. Part 4 ended with recognition. Part 5 would begin with power. The call that shut down the airline. The fallout begins. The next morning, the world of aviation was already buzzing, though no one in the public had any idea what was coming. Inside the headquarters of Skylux Air, tension hung in the air like thick fog. Employees moved unusually fast, phones rang non-stop, and every executive in the upper floor had been ordered to report in immediately. And all of it, because of one call. Steven Seagal had not raised his voice, not made a scene, not used his celebrity status to demand special treatment. But the severity of what had happened, forcing a passenger out of his paid seat, mishandling procedures, breaching protocol, and mistreating a public figure, had triggered investigations far bigger than the airline expected. The FAA didn't take these things lightly, especially when the mistreated passenger had powerful contacts. Inside the executive boardroom, CEO Michael Harrington looked pale. His tie was loose, his sleeves rolled up, and his face showed a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and fear. Explain to me, he demanded, slamming a folder on the table, how a passenger booked and confirmed in first class ended up shoved into economy like a piece of luggage? Silence. No one breathed. Finally, the lead supervisor spoke. Sir, it was a miscommunication. The flight attendant believed the seat was double booked and so she dragged a passenger out without verifying the manifest? The CEO snapped. Did she even check the priority list? The booking system? Anything? Another supervisor swallowed hard. She made the decision on her own. She said the passenger didn't look like someone who belonged in first class. The CEO froze. Then he whispered, "Oh God." Because that wasn't just a mistake. That was discrimination. And discrimination in aviation wasn't a small internal HR issue. It was a full-blown federal violation. Suddenly the boardroom door swung open, and the head of legal rushed in. "We have a problem," she said bluntly, dropping a stack of papers in front of Harrington. Steven Seagal is not filing a personal complaint, but the FAA is filing one on his behalf. Gasps filled the room. "Wait, what?" a VP stuttered. "He didn't complain. He just made a phone call." That phone call, the lawyer said, went directly to the Office of Aviation Standards. They reviewed the incident immediately. And do you know what they found? She opened the file dramatically. 6 major violations. Forced seat reassignment without cause. Failure to follow boarding protocols. Abuse of authority by crew. Violation of passenger safety rights. Discrimination based on appearance. Mishandling of a VIP-level passenger. Someone whispered, "We're screwed?" But the lawyer wasn't finished. The FAA has grounded all Skylux flights for an emergency compliance audit. Silence slammed over the room again. Grounded flights. That meant thousands of passengers stranded. Millions in losses. And the airline's reputation, destroyed. This could shut us down, a senior VP muttered, sinking into his chair. The CEO rubbed his forehead, his voice barely steady. "Where is the flight attendant now?" "Suspended. Immediately." "And the gate manager?" "Also suspended." "And the captain?" "He's being interviewed." The CEO looked around the table, his expression dark and heavy. This airline has been running on "we'll fix it later" for too long. Yesterday. Later, ran out. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Steven Seagal walked quietly through the terminal with his carry-on bag. He didn't wear sunglasses to hide. He didn't look angry or aggressive. In fact, he looked calm, almost disappointed. A reporter recognized him immediately. "Mr. Seagal, is it true you filed a complaint that shut down an entire airline?" Steven paused, turned his head slightly, and said in his deep, quiet voice, "I didn't shut anything down. They shut themselves down when they forgot how to treat people." The reporter blinked. Before they could ask more questions, Steven added, "It was never about me. It was about respect for any passenger." And with that, he walked toward the exit, disappearing into the crowd as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But behind him, an entire airline was collapsing. And this was just the beginning. The boardroom of Skylux Air was a storm. Phones rang endlessly, emails flooded in from executives, airport managers, and regulatory authorities. The CEO, Michael Harrington, paced the room, rubbing his temples, trying to absorb the magnitude of what was happening. All because of one phone call Steven Seagal had made. One calm, precise call that exposed a chain of mistakes, bias, and incompetence. Within an hour of that call, the airline had launched a full internal investigation. Every staff member involved in the incident, from the gate supervisor to the flight attendants, had been placed on immediate suspension. Security footage was being reviewed. Passenger statements were being collected. And in every report, one pattern was clear. Steven Seagal had been treated differently because of his appearance. Meanwhile, at the airport, news crews had arrived. The terminal was buzzing with rumors. "That's Steven Seagal, the actor. Did you hear he shut down the airline?" "No, seriously. He made a phone call and they grounded flights." Inside the aircraft, the white businessman who had originally taken Steven's seat sat frozen, realizing his smug satisfaction had been completely misplaced. A series of announcements came over the intercom. "Passengers, we regret to inform you that all flights on Skylux Air are temporarily suspended due to an urgent compliance audit." The supervisor who had humiliated Steven tried to save face. "It wasn't personal. I was just following procedure," he insisted to the regional manager who had arrived. But the manager didn't look convinced. He had already seen the footage. The calm, unwavering composure of Steven Seagal standing his ground while the staff repeatedly ignored protocol. He had read the complaints of passengers who had witnessed the discrimination firsthand. "You need to understand something," the regional manager said, his tone cold, measured. "This isn't about procedure anymore. This is about accountability. And right now, the fault is entirely on your shoulders." The supervisor's face turned pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Back at the terminal, Steven Seagal had remained calm throughout. Reporters swarmed him, but he didn't raise his voice or act confrontational. He answered questions politely yet firmly. "I'm not here to punish anyone," he said. "I made one call to ensure that fairness and protocol were followed. That's all. No passenger should ever be judged by appearance, rank, or celebrity status." The crowd around him listened, murmuring in agreement. People who had been recording the incident uploaded footage immediately. Within minutes, social media was flooded with videos, eyewitness accounts, and commentary. The story went viral. Inside the airline, the hostile supervisor tried to explain himself. "I didn't know who he was." "You didn't know?" the regional manager interrupted, voice rising slightly. "That's exactly the problem. You judged a passenger based on appearance, not facts. And now your airline is grounded, your staff are suspended, and your credibility is destroyed." The supervisor's jaw dropped. He had no response. Steven didn't gloat. He didn't revel in their embarrassment. Instead, he stayed gracious, demonstrating the dignity that had marked his life and career. He looked at the supervisor and said softly but firmly, "You've shown what happens when people ignore respect. Let this be a lesson. It's never about who you are. It's about how you treat others." The crowd erupted in approval. People clapped, cheered, and some even whistled. The supervisor slunk away, humiliated in front of his peers, the press, and the world. Even the once smug businessman looked away, clearly ashamed. Steven turned to the crowd one last time. "Fairness, respect, and equality," he said. "Those are things everyone deserves. And no one, not an airline, not a gate supervisor, not anyone, has the right to take that away." The crowd nodded. Phones were still recording. Witnesses were still talking. And in that moment, the tables had fully turned. Engagement line. Do you think the supervisor deserves to lose his job after this? Share your opinion in the comments below. The scene closed with Steven walking calmly toward his rescheduled flight, leaving a terminal buzzing not with scandal, but with lessons about fairness, dignity, and courage. By the next morning, the story of Steven Seagal being removed from first class, and the swift fallout that followed, had spread across every major news outlet. Airport news feeds, social media platforms, and aviation forums buzzed with clips, eyewitness accounts, and heated debate. Within hours, the hashtag respect passengers was trending worldwide. Steven Seagal, however, had not sought the spotlight. He hadn't called reporters, posted online, or boasted. He had simply done one thing: demand fairness and respect. And in doing so, he had inadvertently exposed the airline's failings to millions of people overnight. The footage from the terminal went viral almost immediately. The moment he calmly handed over his ticket, the staff's dismissiveness, the smirks of the businessman, and Steven's quiet, unflinching composure were captured in detail. People were in awe. Some said it reminded them that courage didn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it was quiet, unwavering, and principled. The airline, Skylux Air, faced public backlash. Customers canceled bookings, demanding accountability. Stock prices dropped. The FAA launched a full investigation into the airline's conduct. The suspended staff members, including the supervisor who had humiliated Steven, faced disciplinary actions, and the CEO had to issue a public apology. Despite all of this, Steven remained calm. He didn't revel in the embarrassment of those who had mistreated him. Instead, he used the moment to deliver a broader message about dignity, equality, and respect. In an interview with a prominent news channel, he said, "Yesterday I was treated unfairly. I was judged for how I look, not who I am or what I've done. But this isn't just about me. Every passenger deserves respect, not because they're famous, not because they're wealthy, but because they're human." The interviewer paused, impressed by the quiet authority in his voice. "And what would you like to see happen next?" Steven replied, "I want this to be a lesson. Policies should be followed. Staff should be trained to treat everyone fairly. And people should never assume their own biases are acceptable." Social media erupted. Clips of Steven standing calmly, watching the supervisor falter, and then making that single decisive phone call circulated across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Headlines read, "Steven Seagal holds airline accountable, calmly and decisively. One call from Steven Seagal shuts down flights, exposes bias. The action-packed hero doesn't throw a punch, he just demands respect." Fans and observers commented endlessly, praising not only his career but his composure, dignity, and courage in an unexpected real-world confrontation. Meanwhile, back at Skylux Air, the staff involved were undergoing retraining, and the airline issued a full public apology to Steven and to all affected passengers. Policies were being rewritten to prevent similar incidents in the future. Steven Seagal once again had left the terminal. No cameras followed him. No headlines distracted him. He walked out with quiet dignity, leaving a crowd of people, reporters, and staff reflecting on what had just happened. He had proved, without confrontation or theatrics, that respect is more powerful than anger, that composure can command attention, and that one voice, even calm and measured, can change an entire system. Final engagement CTA for YouTube viewers. If you believe in respect, equality, and fairness for everyone, type respect in the comments. Share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up quietly but powerfully against injustice? And with that, the story ended not with a fight, not with violence, but with a lesson. Courage isn't always loud, and justice sometimes comes with a calm, unwavering voice. The airport, the airline, and the world would remember this day for a long time.